Caleb Turner hadn't cried since the day they put his wife in the ground. 3 years of silence. 3 years of holding everything together with nothing but raw will and the sound of his daughter's voice in the morning. He wasn't a man who asked for help. He wasn't a man who asked for anything. But the morning he watched Emma set 2 plates at breakfast, one for herself and one for an empty chair, he walked to his desk, picked up a pen, and wrote the hardest words of his life. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Clara and Caleb all the way to the end. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. The advertisement had been simple, brutal even, the way Caleb Turner liked most things. Widower rancher, Red Willow Creek, Colorado Territory. Seeks strong, capable woman. Life is hard. No luxury. No false promises. Respond only if serious. He hadn't expected many replies. He'd written it that way on purpose. He wanted to scare off the dreamers, the romantics, the women who read too many dime novels and thought the frontier was some kind of fairy story waiting to happen. He wanted a woman who could look at a pile of dirty work and not flinch. A woman who could handle heat and cold and loneliness and still get up before sunrise and do it all again. He got 32 letters. 29 of them he burned in the fireplace the same night. 3 he read twice. 2 of those he put aside without answering. 1 he kept. My name is Clara Whitmore. I am 26 years of age. I am not afraid of hard work. I do not require comfort. I require only honesty. If you can offer that, I believe we can build something worthwhile. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't pretty. But there was something in the plainness of it, something that felt like a woman who meant exactly what she said. He wrote back. She wrote back. 3 letters total, and by the end of the 3rd, the arrangement was made. She would arrive on the July train. He would meet her at the Red Willow Creek station. They would be married before the month was out. Emma had been over the moon about it for 6 straight weeks. Papa, do you think she likes horses? Don't know. Do you think she can bake? Mrs. Hensley next door can bake apple pie, but hers always burns on the bottom. Emma. What if she doesn't like me? She'll like you. He'd said it without thinking, and then felt strange about it afterward. Because he'd made a promise he had no business making. He didn't know this woman. He didn't know anything about her except 3 letters and a name. But Emma had smiled like he'd hung the moon, and he'd let it go. The Red Willow Creek station smelled like coal smoke and hot wood, and the particular kind of human desperation that came with summer travel. Caleb stood on the platform, with his hat pulled low and his arms crossed, and his face set in the expression that most men in this territory had learned to leave alone. Emma stood beside him, her small hand tucked into his, bouncing so regularly that he'd stopped noticing it, the way he'd stopped noticing the wind. She's going to be on this one, Emma said. I can feel it, Papa. Right here. She pressed her free hand flat against her chest, directly over her heart. You said that about the last 2 trains. I was warming up. He didn't answer. He watched the platform. Smoke rolled across the boards in long, pale ribbons. The crowd was the usual sort. Traveling merchants, a few homesteaders with too much luggage and not enough sense. A preacher in a black coat, sweating visibly through the collar. Caleb watched them all the way. A man watches cattle, measuring without feeling, accounting without caring. And then the last car emptied, and she stepped down. He knew it was her before she even looked up. He didn't know how. Some instinct, maybe. The same instinct that told him when a storm was coming before the clouds showed themselves. Something about the way she moved, careful, deliberate, like every step was a decision she'd thought through. She was wearing a pale blue dress that had no business being anywhere near a cattle ranch. Her hair was pinned up neatly under a small hat. Her hands were gloved. Gloved in July heat in Colorado territory. And she was carrying a single traveling bag that looked like it had been packed by someone who didn't fully understand how permanent this trip was going to be. She was slight, small-shouldered, and pale-skinned, the kind of woman you'd expect to see teaching Sunday school or playing piano in a parlor somewhere in the civilized East. Not standing on a frontier train platform in the July heat, about to marry a man she'd never laid eyes on. Caleb felt something drop in his chest, something cold and certain. This won't work. She looked up, and their eyes met, and he watched her take him in the same way he'd taken her in, and he saw the exact moment her confidence flickered. Just for a second, just long enough to be honest. She crossed the platform toward him. "Mr. Turner?" Her voice was steady. He'd give her that. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "It's good to finally—" "You're smaller than I expected," he said. It came out flat and direct, the way he said most things, and he watched her blink once, just once. Then her chin came up about half an inch, and something in her expression settled back into composure. "And you're quieter than your letters suggested," she said. "I suppose we both have adjustments to make." Before he could answer, Emma broke free of his hand and threw herself directly into Clara's path, arms wide open, the full force of an 8-year-old's uncomplicated joy aimed like a cannonball. "You're here," Emma announced. "I've been waiting forever. Papa said I couldn't write to you myself, but I dictated one of his letters, so some of it was from me. The part about the horses being gentle, that was me." Clara caught her. Or rather, she absorbed the impact with a small laugh, genuinely surprised, genuinely warm. And she went down on one knee, right there on the platform, holding this child she'd never met, and she said, "Well, hello to you too. You must be Emma." "I'm Emma Ruth Turner, and I'm 8 years old, and I've been praying for you since February," Emma said, with complete seriousness. Clara looked up at Caleb over Emma's head. Something crossed her face. Not pity, not sentiment. Something more careful than that. Something that looked almost like gratitude, or recognition, or maybe both at once. "Then I'll try my best to be worth praying for," Clara said quietly. Caleb picked up her bag without a word and started toward the wagon. The ride back to the ranch took the better part of 2 hours. Emma talked for roughly 100 minutes of it, pausing only to breathe. Clara listened with what appeared to be genuine interest, asking questions, laughing at the right moments, and occasionally throwing glances at Caleb that he pretended not to catch. He caught every one. He kept his eyes on the road and his thoughts to himself, and did the accounting he always did when something new entered his life. When he added a horse, or hired a hand, or took on a new piece of land. Measuring, evaluating, deciding where the weak points were. The weak points here were obvious. Her hands were soft. Her shoes were wrong. Completely wrong. Impractical city shoes that would be ruined inside of a week. She'd never mentioned animals in her letters, except to say she wasn't afraid of them, which was a very different thing from knowing how to work alongside them. She'd said she could cook. He would reserve judgment on that. What he hadn't been able to account for was the way Emma had folded herself against Clara's side on the wagon bench, casual as sunrise, like this woman had always been there. Emma didn't do that. Emma was bold with strangers, but she kept her body to herself. She'd done that since her mother died, like she was protecting something. But here she was, leaned into this woman's arm, chattering like a magpie, and Clara's hand had settled onto Emma's shoulder so naturally that Caleb had to wonder if she'd noticed she'd done it. "What were you teaching?" he said. Clara glanced at him. "Pardon?" "You said you were a school teacher. What grades?" "3rd through 6th, mostly." Small school, one room, outside of Kansas City. Why'd you leave? A pause, brief but real. The position ended, she said. He didn't push it, not then. But he filed it away. The house hit her harder than he expected. He watched it happen, watched her step through the front door and stand still for just a moment, taking in the bare walls and the functional furniture and the general evidence that no woman had lived here in 3 years, and no one had tried very hard to compensate for that fact. The curtains were ones his wife Sarah had hung, faded now. The kitchen was serviceable. The floors were clean. He'd made sure of that, at least. "It's good bones," Clara said. "What?" "The house. Good bones. A little care and it'll be something." He looked at her. She was looking at the kitchen, not at him, and her expression was practical and calm, like she was already measuring the work against her capability and finding the equation manageable. "Bedroom's through there," he said. "Mine's on the other side of Emma's room. Until we're married proper, that's how it stays." "Of course," she said, and there was nothing in her voice that suggested anything other than agreement. "Reverend Marsh comes through every 2 weeks. He'll be here Thursday." "Thursday." She turned toward him then, fully. "That's 4 days." "Is that a problem?" She held his gaze. "No," she said. "I just want to be clear on the arrangement." "The arrangement is exactly what I wrote in my letters." "You wrote that you needed a capable partner, a mother for your daughter, a woman willing to work hard and expect nothing soft in return." "That's right." "Then I have one question," she said, and something in her tone shifted. Still calm, but with an edge underneath, something careful and precise. "When you wrote capable, did you mean capable as you define it, or capable as the work actually requires?" He stared at her. "Because those are sometimes 2 different things," she said, "and I'd like to know which one I'm being measured against." Caleb Turner had not been surprised by another human being in a very long time. He stood there in his own kitchen and felt something move behind his ribs that he couldn't immediately name. "We'll see," he said finally. She nodded, like that was perfectly acceptable, and turned toward the kitchen to start figuring out what there was to cook for supper. Supper was edible. That was the honest verdict, and he was honest with himself about most things. The beans were a little undersalted. The bread was competent, and she'd found the dried apples he'd forgotten were in the pantry and done something reasonable with them. Emma ate 2 full helpings, which he noted. Emma's appetite was a more reliable indicator of the quality of a meal than his own palate, which years of his own cooking had somewhat damaged. "This is good," Emma announced, with the authority of someone who had not previously had enough women cooking for her. "Miss Clara, can you make cornbread? Papa's cornbread is like eating a boot." "Emma," he said, "I'm being honest. You always say be honest." "I say be honest, not be rude." "It's both at the same time," Emma said, with complete logical satisfaction. Clara pressed her lips together in a way that he was almost certain was suppressing a smile. "I can make cornbread," she said. "We'll try it tomorrow, if your father doesn't mind." "He won't mind," Emma said. "He won't say so, but he won't mind." He said nothing. He ate his beans. But that night, after Emma was asleep and the lamp was burning low and the ranch had gone quiet, he sat on the porch with his coffee and turned the day over the way he turned soil, methodically, looking for what was underneath. She was not what he'd expected. That was the plain truth of it. He'd expected someone harder, someone rougher around the edges. He'd written that advertisement to attract a woman already shaped by difficulty, already practical and unsentimental. What he'd gotten instead was a woman who appeared soft and arrived with city shoes and gloved hands, but who had looked him in the eye within 30 minutes of meeting him and asked him, calmly and without apology, whether his expectations were reasonable. He hadn't had a woman ask him that in 3 years. He hadn't had anyone ask him that in 3 years. He didn't know what to do with it. He finished his coffee and went inside and told himself the same thing he'd told himself about every new variable on this ranch. Give it a week, then you'll know. He knew by Wednesday. Monday, she burned breakfast. He said nothing. Emma ate the burned eggs without complaint, and Clara started again from the beginning. He left for the fields without commenting. Monday afternoon, one of the younger hands, a boy named Decker, 19 years old with more confidence than sense, made a remark in the yard within what he apparently thought was out of earshot. Something about city wives and dead weight, delivered to the other two hands with a particular cruelty of boys who think meanness passes for humor. Caleb was 20 feet away and didn't intervene. Clara was 10 feet away and had heard every word. She set down the water bucket she was carrying, turned toward Decker with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who had made a decision, and said in a perfectly level voice, "I reckon I'll be dead weight until I'm not. Same as everyone who's new to a place. But I'd appreciate if you kept your opinions about me to yourself while I'm standing close enough to hear them. That's just manners, and manners cost nothing." Decker stared at her. His ears went red. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and looked at the ground. She picked up the water bucket and kept walking. Caleb stood very still in the barn doorway and watched her cross the yard, and thought that he was going to have to revise at least one of his calculations. Tuesday, she found the broken fence line on the east pasture that he hadn't gotten to yet, and spent 3 hours in the July heat with wire and pliers, doing a repair job that wasn't perfect, but was structurally sound, and showed that she understood what she was doing. He didn't ask her how she knew how to do it. He noted it and moved on. Tuesday night, he came in late from the south field and found her at the kitchen table with a book open in front of her. Not a novel, not a Bible. Something dense and practical looking, with pages she'd clearly read before, based on the way she turned them without hesitating. She closed it when she heard him come in, and that bothered him more than the book itself. "What are you reading?" he said. "Nothing important," she said, and set it face down on the table. "You don't have to stop on my account." "I'm not." She stood up. "I was about to make tea. Do you want any?" "No." She made herself tea and went to bed, and left him standing in his own kitchen with the feeling that there was a room in this house with a locked door he hadn't known about. Wednesday. Emma fell off the fence she'd been told 17 times not to climb, and came in crying with a bloodied knee and both hands scraped raw. Caleb was in the south field. It was Clara who was there. He came in at noon and found Emma at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped in clean cloth, her knee bandaged, and her tear-stained face turned up toward Clara, who was sitting across from her and telling her something in a low voice that made Emma laugh once, a surprised and watery laugh, and then wipe her face with the back of her wrist. "She's fine," Clara said before he could ask. "I can see that." "She was very brave." "I wasn't at first," Emma said with complete honesty. "I cried a lot at first. But then Miss Clara said it was allowed because it hurt. And after that, it wasn't as bad." Clara met his eyes over Emma's head. Something passed between them that wasn't warmth exactly, and wasn't quite comfort, but was something he didn't have a word for, and wasn't sure he'd experienced before. "Thank you," he said. It was 2 words. They cost him something he didn't fully understand yet. "It's what I'm here for," she said simply, and turned back to Emma, and he stood in the doorway of his own kitchen and understood for the first time that maybe, just maybe, God and Emma together were smarter than he was. Thursday came, And Reverend Marsh came with it, and Caleb Turner, widower, rancher, a man who had built an entire life on the principle that he knew exactly what he needed, stood at the front of his own house with this woman beside him, Emma between them both, with her hand in Clara's, and said the words. And when it was done, and Reverend Marsh had gone, and Emma had fallen asleep on the porch in the late afternoon heat, a thing she did sometimes, just dropped where she was when the day ran out, Caleb stood beside Clara at the kitchen door and looked out at his land and couldn't think of a single thing to say. Clara spoke first. "I know you didn't get what you expected," she said. "No. I know this isn't easy for either of us." He was quiet for a long time. "You patched that east fence pretty well," he said finally. She looked at him. A long beat of silence. "That's either a compliment or a statement of fact," she said. "Both," he said, and the corner of her mouth moved, barely, just barely, and she looked back out at the land, and the light was gold and long across the fields, and the ranch was quiet in the way that meant everyone had done a good day's work. It wasn't a love story yet. He wouldn't have called it that. Wouldn't have known how. But it was a beginning, and it was enough for now. The first week of their marriage passed the way hard things usually pass, 1 hour at a time, with no ceremony about it. Clara learned the rhythm of the ranch the same way she'd learned everything else in her life, by watching first, asking second, and doing third without complaint. She was up before Caleb each morning, which he hadn't expected, and she went to bed after Emma each night, which he also hadn't expected. And in between, she worked with the quiet, relentless focus of someone who had decided that failure was not an option she was willing to entertain. The hands adjusted to her in stages. Decker, after the incident with the water bucket, had gone respectful and stayed that way. The other two, older men named Holt and Briggs, who had worked the Turner Ranch for years, watched her with the careful neutrality of men who had learned not to form opinions too fast. She didn't push them. She didn't try to charm them. She just showed up, day after day, and did the work in front of her, and let the work speak. But Caleb watched. He always watched. And what he saw didn't line up cleanly. She burned the beans twice in the first week, and oversalted the stew once. But she fixed both mistakes before he sat down to eat, which meant she'd tasted it and caught it herself, which meant she was paying attention even when she failed. She blistered her hands on the fence wire and said nothing about it until Emma spotted the raw skin and made enough noise for both of them. She fell off a horse, just once, just the skittish gray mare that even Holt handled carefully. And she hit the ground hard and lay still for 2 full seconds, and Caleb's heart seized in his chest before she sat up, pressed her hand to her ribs, and said, "I'm getting back on." "You don't have to," he started. "I know I don't have to." She was already on her feet, already walking back toward the mare, with the deliberate steadiness of someone overriding fear by sheer force of will. "Hand me the reins." He handed her the reins. She got back on. That was the moment Holt stopped watching her neutrally and started watching her with something closer to respect. Caleb pretended not to notice, but he did. What he couldn't pretend not to notice was the book. He'd seen it twice now, always closed before he got close enough to read the cover, always face down on whatever surface she'd been using. Once on the kitchen table, once on the window ledge of the bedroom she was still, technically, occupying alone while he slept across the hall. The third time he saw it, it was on the porch bench, and he got close enough to catch the spine before she picked it up. Tactical Survey of the Western Territories, 1869. He stood very still. She picked the book up and held it against her side, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that was starting to feel like a language he didn't fully speak yet. "That's a strange book for a school teacher," he said. "I read widely," she said. "That's not an answer." "No," she said, "it isn't." He could have pushed. Part of him wanted to. But there was something in her face. Not fear, not deception exactly, but a kind of careful guardedness. The look of someone carrying something they weren't ready to put down yet. And he found, to his own surprise, that he was willing to wait. He didn't fully understand why, only that he was. Emma, for her part, was operating on a completely different level from everyone else on the property. She had decided, with the absolute certainty that 8-year-olds reserve for the things that matter most to them, that Clara was the answer to a prayer she had been praying since she was 5 years old. And she treated this conviction as settled fact rather than working theory. She followed Clara everywhere. She talked to Clara constantly. She brought Clara interesting rocks, a baby bird she found on the ground near the barn, which Clara gently and firmly helped her return to the nest, and once, memorably, a live frog in her coat pocket, which Clara screamed at before recovering herself and insisting she had not screamed at all, but merely expressed surprise. "You screamed," Emma said, with total satisfaction. "I reacted audibly to an unexpected amphibian." "Papa, she screamed!" "I'm staying out of this," Caleb said, from the other side of the kitchen. Clara pointed at him. "Coward!" He looked up from his coffee, and something happened in his chest that he hadn't felt in 3 years. Something light and surprised, gone before he could name it. And he looked back down at his coffee and said nothing, because he was not a man who knew what to do with lightness anymore, and he wasn't ready to learn. Not yet. The trouble started on a Tuesday, 12 days into the marriage, when a rider came in from town. Caleb was in the east field when he heard Emma calling his name with the particular pitch she used for emergencies, and he was moving before she finished the second syllable. He came around the barn at a half-run and found her standing in the yard with a folded paper in her hand, and her face set in an expression he recognized. The expression she got when she was frightened but working hard not to show it, because she'd learned it from watching him. "Man from town left this," she said. He didn't wait for an answer. Caleb took the paper, unfolded it, read it. His jaw tightened. Clara appeared in the doorway of the house. She took one look at his face. "What is it?" He handed her the paper without speaking. She read it, slowly. He watched her eyes track each line, and he watched her expression shift, not to fear, but to something more analytical, more precise. "Silas Boone," she said. "You know the name?" "I've heard it in town, at the dry goods store. Mrs. Hensley mentioned him." She folded the letter with the careful, deliberate movements of someone thinking while their hands worked. "She said he's been buying up land along the creek valley." "He's been trying to buy this land," Caleb said, "for the better part of 2 years. I've said no every time." "The letter says the railroad survey—" "I know what the letter says." He took it back, folded it again, put it in his shirt pocket. "It says there's a railroad survey coming through the valley, and any property in the direct path will be acquired by the county if the owner doesn't negotiate terms ahead of time. And it says Boone is prepared to offer fair value before that happens, as a courtesy." Clara was quiet for a moment. "That's not an offer," she said. "That's a warning dressed up as a favor." He looked at her. "He's telling you he already knows the railroad route," she said. "And he's telling you that you either deal with him on his terms or deal with the county on worse terms. He wants you afraid before you walk into any negotiation." She paused. "Does the county actually have authority to acquire without consent?" "Not easily, not fast. It's a process that takes time and lawyers and—" He stopped, looked at her again. "How do you know about railroad acquisition law?" She met his eyes, steady as ever. "I told you. I read widely." He held her gaze for 5 full seconds. "Clara." His voice was quiet. "Who are you?" Something moved across her face, quick, honest, painful. There and gone. "I'm your wife," she said. "I'm Emma's. I'm trying to be what Emma needs me to be. And right now what you need is to not be alone against this man." She paused. "Let me help you." "You're a school teacher from Kansas City." "Yes." "Who reads military survey books and knows eminent domain law." "Yes." He waited. She pressed her lips together and looked past him toward the south field, where the land rolled out flat and golden toward the tree line, and he could see her making a decision in real time. "My father was Colonel Robert Whitmore," she said. "He served under General Sherman. After the war, he worked in territorial land administration. I grew up reading his documents, sitting in on his meetings, listening to men argue about maps and law and strategy, because there was nothing else to do, and he never saw any reason to send me out of the room." She looked back at Caleb. "When he died 2 years ago, I had nothing left in Kansas City. The school position had already ended. The school board decided they preferred a male teacher, and I had no family and no future, and a name that opened some doors and closed others. And I decided the frontier was better than standing still." She stopped. "I should have told you sooner. I know that." Caleb said nothing for a long moment. The thing he noticed, the thing he filed away carefully, was that he wasn't angry. He thought he should be angry. He'd built this arrangement on the premise of honesty, and she'd held something back. By any reasonable accounting, he had the right to be angry. But what he felt instead was something quieter and more complicated. Something that felt, if he was honest, a little like relief. "The position ended," he said. "What?" "In your first letter, you said the position ended. That's what you said." She blinked. "You weren't lying," he said. "You were just not finishing the sentence." She was quiet for a beat. "No," she said slowly. "I wasn't lying." He nodded once, the way he nodded when he'd finished working out a calculation and was satisfied with the result. "Then you know how to fight this," he said, and pulled the letter back out of his pocket and held it out to her. "Tell me what to do first." Something shifted in her expression, something unguarded and immediate, there before she could compose it away, and it was the most honest look she'd given him since she'd stepped off that train. Not gratitude exactly, something older and more tired than gratitude. Something that looked like what a person looks like when they've been waiting a long time to be taken seriously, and finally, unexpectedly, are. She took the letter. "First," she said, "you don't respond to this. You don't give him anything. Not acknowledgement, not anger, not silence that he can read as fear. You go about your business, and you let him wait." She unfolded the letter again, studying it. "Second, you find out exactly what the railroad survey actually says, not what Boone is telling you it says. Those are 2 different things, and he's counting on you not knowing the difference." "How do I find that out?" "The county land office. I can write the inquiry, the right way, the way that gets answered. My father's name still means something to county administrators." Caleb was quiet. "Third," she said, "you need to know who else in this valley has gotten a letter like this one. Because Boone isn't coming after one ranch. He's coming after the whole water corridor, and he needs enough of it to make the railroad deal work. If you're not the only one he's pressuring, you're not fighting alone." She looked up. "You're fighting together." The yard was quiet except for the sound of the horses moving in the pen and Emma's feet on the porch boards behind them, pretending she wasn't listening. "You've been here 12 days, Caleb said. "Yes. And you've already figured out half the valley." "I've been paying attention," she said. "It's what I do." He stood there looking at her in the bright July heat. This woman in her city-made clothes, with her blistered hands and her practical eyes and her father's war maps filed away somewhere in her memory. And he thought about that first day on the platform, when he'd looked at her and felt something drop in his chest and thought, this won't work. He thought he might have been wrong. He was not a man who admitted that easily, but he was a man who admitted it when the evidence was overwhelming. "Write the inquiry," he said. "I'll ride to the Hensley place and the McGregor spread and see if they've had the same letter." She nodded, already turning, already moving toward the house with the focused momentum of someone who had a task and intended to finish it. Clara. He didn't know why he said her name. It came out before he'd decided on it. She stopped, looked back at him. "Thank you," he said, "for not running when it got hard." She held his gaze for a moment that stretched longer than it needed to. Something passed through her eyes, not the careful composure she usually wore, but something real underneath it, something worn and true. "I made an honest arrangement," she said. "I intend to keep it." She went inside. Emma appeared at Caleb's elbow so suddenly he almost startled. "I like her, Papa," Emma said, as if this were news. "I noticed," he said. "Do you like her?" He looked at the door she'd gone through, thought about tactical survey books and eminent domain law, and a woman who got back on a horse after she fell, and patched a fence, and stood in front of a rude 19-year-old and kept her voice level. "Go help her find paper," he said. "She's got a letter to write." Emma beamed and ran inside. Caleb stood in the yard alone and looked out at the south field and the tree line, and beyond it, somewhere in that direction, Silas Boone's land and Silas Boone's plans, and whatever was coming next. He'd been fighting for this ranch alone for 3 years. He'd built a life out of stubbornness and solitude, and the daily discipline of not needing anyone. He wasn't sure he knew how to fight beside someone, but he was starting to think he was going to find out. The letter went out Wednesday morning. By Friday afternoon, he'd ridden to 3 neighboring properties and come back with something he hadn't expected. Not just confirmation that Boone had sent similar letters to every rancher along the creek corridor, but something harder, something that settled in his gut and didn't move. 2 of the neighbors had already signed. He came in that evening and found Clara at the kitchen table with Emma, helping her with some arithmetic that Emma was visibly suffering through. And something about the scene, the lamplight, Emma's furrowed brow, Clara's patient voice talking her through the same problem for what was probably the 3rd time, hit him in the chest before he could defend against it. He stood in the doorway and didn't say anything for a moment. "Papa's home," Emma announced without looking up, because she could apparently identify his footsteps from 30 feet. Clara looked up. She read his face in 1 second flat. "Emma, go wash up for supper," she said. "But I'm not done. The arithmetic will wait. Go ahead." Emma went, with the dramatic resignation of someone who was used to conversations being redirected over her head. Her footsteps faded down the hall. "How bad?" Clara said. "Hensley signed last month. McGregor signed 2 weeks ago." Caleb sat down heavily in the chair across from her. "That's 2/3 of the water rights on the east side of the creek." Clara was very still. "Without their land, I'm the last parcel that makes the corridor complete," he said. "Which means Boone doesn't just want my land, he needs it. And a man who needs something is a different kind of dangerous than a man who wants it." "Yes," she said quietly. "He is. He'll come at me harder now." "Yes, he will." She was looking at her hands on the table, and he could see her thinking. Actually thinking, working through something, the way she went inward when the problem was serious. Then she looked up. "Did Hensley and McGregor get the same letter you did, or different ones?" He reached into his pocket and unfolded 2 pieces of paper alongside his own, laid them flat on the table. She read all 3, slowly. Her brow tightened once. "He's escalating the legal language," she said. "Yours is stronger than theirs, more specific." He already knew when he sent yours that you'd be the hardest to move, and he wrote the threat accordingly. She looked up. "Caleb, this isn't just a land deal. He's been planning this for a year, maybe more. He knows this valley better than most of the people living in it." "Then what do we do?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that cracked the evening open and changed it completely. "I need to tell you something else," she said, "about why I left Kansas City." He went very still. "The school board didn't just prefer a male teacher," she said. "They dismissed me because I refused to hand over my father's land survey documents to a railroad acquisition agent who had no legal authority to request them. He was working privately, not for the county, not for the railroad, for himself, getting information ahead of the official survey and selling it to buyers who could act on it before the public knew which land would be valuable." She held his gaze. "His name was Garrett Pullman." Caleb said nothing. "Garrett Pullman," she said carefully, "is Silas Boone's brother-in-law." The lamp burned between them. Outside, the summer night pressed warm and still against the windows. From down the hall, Emma's voice hummed something tuneless while she washed up, completely unaware that the world had just shifted on its axis. Caleb looked at his wife across the kitchen table. "They followed you here," he said. She met his eyes, and for the first time since she'd stepped off that train, he saw fear in her face. Real fear, clear and honest. The fear of a woman who had been carrying a truth alone for too long. "I think so," she said. "Yes." The silence that followed those 3 words sat between them like a loaded rifle on a table, present, specific, and impossible to ignore. Caleb didn't move. He didn't speak. He just looked at his wife across the kitchen table and let the weight of what she'd just told him settle fully before he said anything. Because he was a man who had learned the hard way that words spoken in the first 10 seconds after a shock are rarely the right ones. She waited. She didn't fill the silence with apology or explanation or the anxious chatter of someone hoping to soften what they'd said. She just sat with it, straight-backed and steady, with the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting for a thing to land and is finally watching it land. "How long have you known?" he said. "I suspected when the first letter came," she said. "I was certain when I saw Pullman's name on the county land office correspondence that came back last Thursday." He went very still. "That was 4 days ago." "Yes." "You've known for 4 days." "I needed to be sure before I told you." Her voice was even. "I needed to think through what it meant and what it would change and whether I could be wrong. I didn't want to hand you fear without being certain it was warranted." "Clara." He said her name with a restraint that cost him something. "You brought something dangerous into this house, into Emma's house, and you waited 4 days to tell me." She held his gaze. "I know. That's not a small thing." "No," she said. "It isn't, and I'm not asking you to treat it as one." She leaned forward slightly, both hands flat on the table. "I'm asking you to let me help you fix it. Because I know how these men operate. I know what they want and how they get it, and where they stop and where they don't. And I know, Caleb, I know that the worst thing we can do right now is fight this the way you would fight a man who's just greedy. Boone isn't just greedy. He's protecting something. And a man protecting something will go further than a man who just wants more." He was quiet for a long time. Down the hall, Emma's humming had stopped. The house held its breath. "What is he protecting?" Caleb said finally. "His arrangement with Pullman. If it comes out that Pullman was selling advanced survey information, if any of the landowners in this valley compare notes and realize they were manipulated into signing before the real survey was public, Pullman faces federal charges. Which means Boone faces scrutiny he can't afford." She paused. "That's why they followed me here. Not just for my father's documents. Because I can testify to what Pullman asked for. I'm not just a loose end. I'm the loose end." Caleb absorbed this. His face gave nothing away, but she had learned to read the things his face didn't say. The slight tension in the jaw. The way he breathed slower when he was thinking hard. "Emma," he said quietly. "I know," Clara said immediately, and the fear was back in her face, honest and sharp and real. "I know. That's the part I couldn't. That's why I had to be certain before I spoke. Because the moment I said this out loud, it became something we had to act on. And acting on it puts all of us in the center of it." "We're already in the center of it." His voice was flat. "We've been in the center of it since before you stepped off that train. I just didn't know it." She didn't argue. There was nothing to argue with. He stood up, moved to the window, stood with his back to her for a long moment, looking out at the dark yard, and she watched the set of his shoulders and understood, in the particular way she had been slowly learning to understand him, that he wasn't angry at her, not primarily. He was angry at the situation, and he was containing it the way he contained everything, through his bones, through his posture, through the sheer physical discipline of a man who had learned that falling apart was a luxury he could not afford. "What do we do?" he said. Not like a man asking for help, like a man who had already made a decision and wanted a strategy to go with it. Something shifted in her chest. She hadn't realized until this moment how much she'd been bracing for the other version. The version where he turned on her, sent her back, decided she was more trouble than she was worth. She hadn't expected this. "We go on offense," she said, "before he does." He turned around. She was already reaching for the leather satchel she kept under her chair, the one she'd carried with her from Kansas City, the one she'd never fully unpacked. And she drew out a folded document that she set flat on the table between them. "My father's original survey notes from the 1869 territorial assessment," she said. "The real ones, not the partial version Pullman accessed. The complete record of every water claim, every property boundary, and every projected railroad route through this county as of that survey." She smoothed the document with careful hands. "This is what Pullman wanted. This is what he never got. And this, right here, shows that the route Boone has been telling people the railroad will take is not the route in the actual survey." Caleb came back to the table, looked at the document. His eyes tracked the markings with the practiced focus of a man who had spent years reading land. "The creek corridor," he said slowly. "It's not on the primary route." "No," she said. "It's on the secondary alternate, which the railroad won't use unless the primary route faces legal challenge, which it will, because there are 3 prior water claims on the primary route that predate the territorial charter, and anyone with access to my father's original notes would know that." She looked up at him. "Boone has been buying land on the secondary alternate and telling people it's the primary. He's been manufacturing the fear to drive the sales. The railroad may never come through this valley at all." The kitchen was very still. "He's been lying," Caleb said, "the whole time. Hensley and McGregor sold their land rights for a threat that may not even be real." "Yes, although," she paused, "it's not quite that simple. The railroad could be rerouted to the secondary. It isn't likely, but it's possible, which is exactly enough uncertainty to make the threat credible. Boone isn't stupid. He's built this on a real foundation and just extended it in directions that aren't true." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not admiration exactly. Something more sober than that. Something that recognized a kind of intelligence he hadn't known to look for. "Can we prove it?" he said. "I can write a formal contestation to the county land office," she said, "with the original survey documents as evidence. It won't be fast. These things never are. But it creates a legal record. It puts Boone and Pullman on notice that someone knows what they've done. And it protects you from any forced acquisition because you've established prior contested claim." She hesitated. "But Caleb, the moment I file that document, they'll know it was me. They'll know I have the survey notes and that I've used them, and they will—" She stopped. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "They'll come here," he said. "Yes." He nodded once. "How long do we have before they know you've filed?" "If I send it by post, 2 weeks, maybe 3. County mail is slow. If I ride to the county seat myself and file in person, they'll know within a week." She paused. "But filing in person is harder to delay, harder to lose, and harder to deny having received." "We ride," he said, without hesitation. She blinked. "Caleb." "You and me both. I'm not sending you alone, and I'm not staying here while you go." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down fully for the first time since she'd started talking. Forearms on the table, his full attention on her face. "Emma stays with Holt. He's been here 12 years. He'd take a bullet for her, and she knows it." He paused. "How long is the ride to the county seat?" "Full day. Day and a half to be careful." "We leave at first light Friday. File Saturday. Back by Sunday evening." He looked at her. "Can you ride that far?" "I got back on a horse after I fell off," she said. "Yes, I can ride that far." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. "Pack light," he said. "We travel fast." She nodded and started to gather the documents back into the satchel. And the conversation might have ended there, clean and purposeful and moving toward action, except that Emma appeared in the doorway in her nightgown, hair down, eyes wide with the particular alertness of a child who has been awake in the hallway for longer than she should have been. "Are we in trouble?" she said. Caleb and Clara looked at each other. "Come here," Caleb said. Emma crossed the kitchen and climbed directly into her father's lap, something she did less often now, at 8, with the growing dignity of someone trying to be older than she was. And Caleb held her without comment, his big arms around her small shoulders, and she leaned into him and looked at Clara. "Are we?" she said again. "There's a man," Clara said carefully, "who wants something that isn't his. And your papa and I are going to make sure he doesn't get it." "What does he want?" "The ranch," Caleb said simply. "No cushioning." He never cushioned things with Emma, and Emma had never asked him to. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can he take it?" "No," Caleb said. "How do you know?" He glanced at Clara over Emma's head. "Because we have something he doesn't." Emma looked between them. "What?" Clara held her gaze. "Information," she said. "And each other." Emma considered this with the serious gravity she brought to things that mattered. Then she nodded, once, in the way she'd inherited directly from her father. "Okay," she said. "Don't let him take our house." "We won't," Clara said. "I promise you." Emma seemed satisfied. She tucked her face against Caleb's shoulder for a moment, and Caleb pressed his hand once, briefly, to the top of her head. And then Emma slid off his lap and walked back to her room with the resolute footsteps of someone who had received the information she needed and was done with the conversation. The kitchen went quiet again. Caleb looked at Clara for a long moment after Emma's door clicked shut. "You promised her," he said. Not an accusation, an observation. "Yes," she said. "You know you can't always keep promises like that." "I know." She met his eyes. "But some promises you make anyway, because the cost of not making them is worse than the cost of trying and failing." She paused. "I intend to keep it." He looked at her for another beat. "Get some sleep," he said. "Friday comes fast." She nodded and stood, gathering the satchel, and she was almost to the hallway when his voice stopped her again. "Clara." She turned. "For the record," he said, and his voice had dropped to something lower and more unguarded than she'd heard from him before. I don't hold it against you. What you were carrying. You had your reasons for being careful about it, and they were good reasons." He paused, and the pause was full and careful, like a man walking new ground and testing it as he went. "I just need you to not do it again. Whatever you're carrying, I need to know." She stood in the doorway and looked at him in the lamplight and understood, in the particular way she had been slowly, carefully, unexpectedly beginning to understand this man, that this was not a demand. It was not even a request. It was a man who had been alone for 3 years, extending something he did not extend easily. "I won't," she said quietly. "Not again." He nodded. She went to her room. He sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time afterward, the documents spread in front of him, and he did not look at the documents. He looked at the door she'd gone through, and he thought about the train platform, and the city shoes, and the book she'd kept face down. And he thought about 3 letters that had told him something true, even if they hadn't told him everything. And he thought that maybe the distance between not lying and telling the whole truth was where most people actually lived, and that he probably didn't have clean hands there himself. He thought about Sarah. He thought about her the way he always did, fast and sideways, the way you look at something bright. He thought about what she would have made of all this. He had a feeling she would have laughed. He had a feeling she would have liked Clara. Not for the same reasons he was starting to. He wasn't ready to look directly at those reasons yet. But for her own reasons. The reasons of a woman who recognized a certain kind of strength in another woman and respected it on sight. He put the documents away and went to check the front door and then the barn, the way he did every night. And the night was warm and very still, and the stars were out in force. And somewhere out in the dark, Silas Boone was making plans. Let him, Caleb thought. Let him make all the plans he wanted. Friday came fast. They rode out before the sun was fully up, with Holt standing in the yard watching them go, and Emma on the fence post. Caleb had given up on the fence rule with a thoroughness that surprised him, waving until they were out of sight, and then waving a little longer past that, because that was Emma. They rode mostly in silence, which Caleb preferred, and which Clara seemed to understand without requiring explanation. She rode better than he'd expected, better than the gray mare incident had suggested. She sat a horse like someone who had learned young and been out of practice and was coming back to it, finding the old muscle memory again. And by the first hour, she was easy in the saddle and keeping pace without effort. He noticed. He didn't say anything. He noticed. They stopped once to water the horses at a creek crossing, and it was there, mid-morning, with the sun pressing down hard and the water running quick and cold over the rocks, that they heard the riders. 3 of them, coming up from the south. Caleb heard them before he saw them, the way he always heard things, and he put his hand out toward Clara without looking at her. A flat, still gesture that meant stop and don't move. and she stopped and didn't move, because she had the instincts of someone who understood what that gesture meant. The riders came around the tree bend and pulled up short when they saw them. Caleb recognized one of them. His name was Creel. He worked for Silas Boone. Caleb had seen him in town twice. Once at the feed store, once outside the bank. Always watching, always in the position of a man who reports things rather than doing them himself. He was watching now, and his eyes went from Caleb to Clara and back again. And something in his expression moved with the deliberateness of a man who was calculating. "Mr. Turner," Creel said. "Creel. Headed to the county seat?" Caleb said nothing. Creel's eyes went to Clara's saddlebag, the leather satchel strapped over. Just for a second. Just long enough. "Mr. Boone's been hoping to have a conversation with you," Creel said. "Save you the ride." "He knows where my ranch is," Caleb said. "He does." Creel smiled with his mouth only. "He also knows you're a reasonable man. He'd hate for all this to get complicated when it doesn't have to be." He paused. "Might be worth turning back. Think it over. Give Mr. Boone a chance to make his case directly before things move further than they need to." Caleb looked at him for a long, flat moment. "Tell Boone," he said, "that if he wants a conversation, he can come to my front door and knock like a man. I don't do business in the middle of a road." He clicked his horse forward. Clara moved with him, shoulder to shoulder, and she did not look at Creel as they passed. She kept her eyes forward and her back straight and her hands easy on the reins. And when they were past the three riders and the sound of hooves behind them had not followed, she let out a breath that was the first indication she'd been holding one. "They knew we were coming," she said quietly, once they were well clear. "Yes. There's someone on the ranch." He said it before she did. "Yes." She was quiet. "Decker?" It hit him like a fist. He'd been thinking the same name and not wanting to. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe." "If it's Decker—" "Emma's with Holt," he said. His voice was steady, but she could hear what was underneath it, the particular tightness of a man keeping fear on a very short leash. "Holt is solid. Nothing will happen to Emma." "Caleb, nothing will happen to Emma." He said it again, lower, and it was not reassurance. It was a command he was issuing to the universe itself. "We file the documents. Today. Then we ride home." She didn't argue. She pushed her horse into a faster pace, and he matched it. And the county seat was still 6 hours away, and somewhere behind them Creel was watching them go, and Silas Boone was waiting. And back at the ranch, in the golden summer silence, Emma Turner climbed down from the fence post and went inside for breakfast, and did not know, could not know, that before this week was over, everything was going to change. They filed the documents at 2:30 in the afternoon. The county clerk was a small, precise man named Aldous Finch, who wore his glasses on the very end of his nose and had the particular energy of someone who took bureaucratic procedure seriously enough to make it feel like a moral stance. He read through Clara's contestation filing twice, looked at the original survey documents twice more, and then looked up at her over his glasses with an expression that was equal parts surprise and calculation. "These are Colonel Whitmore's original field notes," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "Robert Whitmore's. He was my father." Finch looked at the documents again, then at Clara, then at Caleb, who was standing slightly behind her with his arms crossed and his face in the expression that communicated, without words, that this conversation was going to end with the papers being filed, regardless of what Finch decided to say about it. "There are significant implications here," Finch said carefully. I'm aware, Clara said. That's why I rode a day and a half to file in person rather than trust it to the postal service. Finch looked at her for another moment. Then he picked up his stamp. The sound of it hitting the paper was one of the most satisfying things Caleb had heard in recent memory. You'll receive a confirmation notice within 10 business days, Finch said, and his voice had shifted, slightly but measurably, to the tone of a man who has recognized that the person across his desk is more serious than he initially assessed. The contestation will be entered into the public record as of today's date. No acquisition proceedings on the listed properties can move forward without judicial review. He paused. Miss Whitmore? Mrs. Turner, Clara said. Finch blinked. Mrs. Turner, you understand that filing this will attract attention. I do, she said. We're counting on it. They were back on the road within the hour. The afternoon was wearing thin, and the light was going long, and Caleb pushed the pace harder than he had on the way out, which Clara matched without complaint and without question, because she had understood from the moment they left Finch's office that something in the air had changed. They'd fired the first shot. Now everything moved faster. They were 4 hours from home when Caleb's horse threw a shoe. He felt it the moment it happened, the subtle wrongness in the gait, the slight unevenness, and he pulled up and was off the horse before Clara had fully registered what had happened. He checked the hoof, confirmed it, and stood up with the particular expression of a man absorbing a setback without letting it touch his face. How bad? Clara said. Not lame, but I can't push him on this terrain in the dark. He looked at the light. 2 hours of it left, maybe less. There's a way station another mile up. Briggs used it last winter when he got caught out on the southern range. We stop there, reshoe in the morning, and ride hard. She looked at him. He could see her doing the same calculation he was doing. Emma, she said. Holt is solid, he said again. But it was different this time. Less certainty, more will. The distinction was not lost on either of them. Caleb, she said his name quietly, if Decker told them we were going, and they knew we'd be gone overnight— I know. He said it flat and fast, cutting off the sentence before she finished it, because hearing it finished would make it more real, and he needed to stay functional. I know. We stop, we reshoe, we leave before sunup. 3 hours of darkness riding is better than laming a horse for the last 4. She nodded. One nod. The kind that meant she wasn't fully at peace with it, but she understood the logic and was choosing to trust it. They rode the mile in silence. The way station was small and rough and adequately stocked, the way frontier accommodations usually were, built for function, not comfort. There was a forge and basic farrier tools, a water trough, a sleeping room with 2 cots that had seen better decades. Caleb reshod the horse himself in the last of the daylight, working fast and clean, and Clara built a fire and found the coffee tin and did not ask him if he wanted any, because she had learned that he always wanted coffee and never asked for it. He came inside to find 2 cups on the table, and she was sitting with her hands around hers and looking at the fire with the focused, inward expression she wore when she was working through something difficult. He sat down, picked up the cup, drank. Tell me what you're thinking, he said. She glanced at him. I'm thinking about Decker. What about him? If it's him, if he's the one who told Boone we were going, then Boone knew 2 things: where we were going and why.
Which means he knows about the survey documents.
She paused.
Which means whatever he does next, he does knowing that the filing is already done. He can't stop it anymore. The record exists.
So he has nothing to gain from the land play, Caleb said.
Not directly, no.
She was quiet for a moment.
But he has something to lose. If the contestation draws scrutiny to his purchases, and it will, And if Pullman's arrangement comes to light, and it might, then the question isn't whether Boone gets the land. It's whether he goes to prison. She looked at Caleb. A man trying to stay out of prison doesn't behave the same way as a man trying to make a deal. He takes risks a rational man wouldn't take. Caleb set his cup down. "Emma," he said. "Just the name. Just the weight of it." "Yes," Clara said. He stood up. "We leave now," he said. "Dark or not." She was already on her feet. They rode the last 4 hours in darkness, pushing as fast as the terrain allowed. And Caleb didn't speak, and Clara didn't speak, and the silence between them was nothing like the silence of the first weeks. It was the silence of two people moving toward the same point with the same urgency, thinking the same thoughts, afraid of the same thing. And it was a different silence entirely from anything that had come before. It was the silence of a family. He understood that somewhere in the third hour, riding hard through the dark, and the understanding landed in his chest and stayed there. He did not have time to do anything with it. They came over the last rise before the ranch, with the sun just beginning to think about the horizon. And Caleb saw the light in the window of the house, the kitchen lamp burning, and something in him released. Someone was up. Someone was there. He pushed the horse harder for the last quarter mile. Holt met them in the yard. He'd heard them coming. His face was tense, in the particular way of a man who has been holding something back all night. "Emma's fine," he said immediately. "She's inside. She's fine." Caleb was off his horse before it fully stopped. "What happened?" "Boone came last night." Holt's jaw was tight. "Him and 2 men. About 9 o'clock. Came to the front door. Civil. Polite even. Said he wanted to wait for you and have a talk." "You let him in?" "I didn't let him anywhere. I told him you weren't home and to come back when you were. He said—" Holt paused, and something moved across his face that Caleb had never seen there before. Something that looked like controlled anger held on a very short leash. "He said he understood, and he hoped Emma wasn't too frightened alone with the darkness coming on." The yard was very still. "He used her name," Clara said quietly. "He used her name," Holt confirmed. "Deliberate. And he looked at the house when he said it." Caleb's hands were very still at his sides. Clara had seen him contain anger before, but not like this. This was something colder than anger, something with edges and a specific shape, the particular stillness of a man deciding how far he was willing to go. "Where's Decker?" Caleb said. Holt's expression told him everything before the words did. "Wasn't here when I woke up this morning," Holt said. "His bunk is cleared. His gear is gone." Caleb nodded once. He turned and went inside. Emma was at the kitchen table in her nightgown, drinking milk and eating cold cornbread with the pragmatic appetite of someone who had decided that last night was last night, and this morning required breakfast. She looked up when Caleb came through the door, and something crossed her face. Fast and young and honest. A flash of pure relief that she immediately covered with an expression of studied calm that was so thoroughly her father's that Clara, coming in behind him, almost caught her breath. "You're back," Emma said. "I'm back." Caleb crossed to her in 3 steps and put his hand on her head. The brief, firm touch he used when words were insufficient. And Emma leaned into it for exactly 1 second before straightening back up. "Mr. Boone came," she said. "I know. Holt told me." "He was polite," Emma said. "That was the part I didn't like." Caleb looked at his daughter. "Explain that," he said. "Mean people who are mean sound mean," Emma said, with the simple clarity of someone who had thought this through carefully overnight. "But he was polite. Like he was showing us something." She paused. He wanted us to know he could come here any time he wanted. That's what the polite was for.
Caleb and Clara looked at each other over Emma's head. 8 years old, Caleb thought. 8 years old, and she'd read it exactly right.
Yes, Clara said to Emma, carefully. That's exactly right.
Emma looked at her.
So what do we do?
We had the same thought, Clara said, and we've already done the first part. She sat down across from Emma. The papers are filed. The legal record exists. That's the most important thing.
But he doesn't care about papers,
Emma said, again. Exactly right.
No, Clara said, he doesn't. So we need something else. What?
Clara looked at Caleb. He was standing at the window, back to the room, looking out at the yard in the early morning light. He'd been there since he checked on Emma, still and thinking, working through something she could see in the set of his shoulders.
Caleb,
she said.
He turned. Hensley and McGregor, she said. They signed because they were afraid. But they signed before the contestation was filed. Before they knew the survey Boone showed them wasn't real.
She held his gaze.
If they knew, if we showed them my father's documents.
They could challenge their own sales, Caleb said. Or, at minimum, they could refuse to honor the water rights transfer until the contestation is resolved,
which ties Boone's hands legally for however long the county review takes. She paused. He can't use land he can't legally certify, and he can't certify anything on the secondary alternate until the primary root question is settled, which I have now made very officially unsettled.
Caleb was looking at her with the focused, direct attention he gave to things he considered seriously. He'll escalate, he said.
Yes.
Before we get to Hensley and McGregor. He knows the filing is done, or he'll know soon. He knows the clock has changed. His voice was level and precise. He won't wait for the legal process to play out against him. He'll do something direct.
Yes,
she said.
I know.
Emma's eyes went from one to the other.
Is someone going to get hurt?
She said. Neither of them answered immediately, and the honesty of that pause was, in its way, more frightening than anything they could have said.
We're going to make sure nobody does, Clara said.
That's not an answer,
Emma said.
Emma,
Caleb started.
You said that's not the same as no,
Emma said. She was looking at her father, steady and serious, and Caleb had the brief, sharp experience of recognizing something of himself in her face at the exact moment he least wanted to. You told me last winter, when I asked if the cattle would all make it through the cold, and you said you were going to work hard to make sure they did. And some of them didn't. She paused. So when you say you're going to make sure, I know what that means. The kitchen was very quiet. Caleb crossed to the table and sat down across from his daughter and looked at her for a long moment. You're right, he said. I don't know for certain. Something might happen. Someone might get hurt. He said it straight, the way he said hard things to her, because she was his daughter, and she had her mother's instinct for when she was being managed, and she deserved better than that.
But I'm not going to let it be you. And I'm not going to let it be this family. That I can promise.
Emma looked at him, then at Clara.
Both of you? She said.
Clara reached across the table and put her hand over Emma's.
Both of us, she said.
Emma turned her hand over and held on. They rode to Hensley's place that afternoon, all three of them, Caleb and Clara and Emma, because Caleb had decided that leaving Emma behind twice in 2 days was not something he was willing to do, and because he thought, with a calculation that was half tactical and half gut instinct, that Emma's presence would matter. People made different decisions in front of children than they did in front of adults. They remembered what they were supposed to be.
Hensley was a big, weathered man in his 60s who met them at his gate with the expression of someone who had been expecting a conversation he'd been dreading. His wife stood behind him on the porch.
She had the look of a woman who had argued against signing and lost, and was living with the consequences of that. Caleb let Clara talk. He had decided this on the ride over, not because he couldn't speak for himself, but because he had watched Clara Whitmore reason with a county clerk and read a room full of strangers in a dry goods store and talk a frightened 8-year-old through a bloody knee. And he understood now that her mind worked in a particular way that was different from his, and that different was not weaker. It was just different. And right now, this specific problem needed exactly what she had. She laid the survey documents across the hood of the wagon. She explained, clearly, simply, without condescension, what the original survey said and what Boone had told Hensley it said, and precisely where those two things diverged. She showed him the filed contestation.
She answered every question he had, and he had several, and she answered each one without hesitation and without looking at Caleb for backup, because she didn't need it. Halfway through, Mrs. Hensley came down off the porch and stood beside her husband. At the end, Hensley took off his hat and held it in both hands and looked at the survey documents for a long time. "He lied to us," he said. "Yes," Clara said, simply, without embellishment. "We signed because we thought we had no choice." "You may still have options," she said. "The contestation complicates every sale in the corridor. Your attorney, if you have one, should be looking at the water rights transfer clause specifically. But you need to act quickly, because Boone knows the clock has changed." Hensley looked at Caleb. "She's right," Caleb said. 2 words, the most useful 2 words he'd said all day. Hensley put his hat back on, looked at his wife. Something passed between them, the shorthand of a long marriage, a conversation in the single look. "I'll send for my attorney tomorrow," Hensley said. It was 4 o'clock when they left the Hensley place. They got to the McGregor spread by 5:30, had the same conversation, and were back on the road by dark. McGregor had been angrier than Hensley. Angry in the explosive, then settling way of a man who feels foolish and needs somewhere to put it. He'd taken it out on the survey documents briefly, then on the fence post he was standing next to, then on the empty air with a string of language he'd caught himself using in front of Emma and apologized for with genuine embarrassment. "Don't apologize," Emma said serenely. "Papa says worse when the cattle get out." McGregor had laughed despite himself, and then he'd looked at the documents and gotten serious again. They were a mile from home in the full dark when Caleb said quietly, "You did well today." Clara looked at him, riding alongside each other, Emma drowsing in the saddle between them, held in place by the kind of boneless sleep that only children achieve. "We did well," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I couldn't have done what you did in there, the way you talked them through it." He said it without difficulty, the plain statement of someone who was comfortable with their own limitations once they'd identified them. "That's not something I have." "You have other things," she said. "Like what?" "Like being the man they've known for 20 years, she said. "When you said she's right, that was the moment Hensley decided. Not the survey documents. You." She paused. "We're better together than we are alone. That's all this is." He rode in silence for a moment. "That's not a small thing," he said finally. "No," she said. "It isn't." Emma made a small sound in the saddle, and Caleb put his hand out automatically, steadying her, and she leaned into it without waking. And the 3 of them moved through the dark together toward the lights of home. They were 200 yards from the ranch gate when Caleb saw it. Orange against the dark. Wrong color. Wrong place. Fire.
Not the barn, not the house. The south field, the newly fenced section, the one Clara had repaired in her first week, the one where the winter feed was stacked and waiting. He was already moving. "Take Emma," he said, and Clara had her before the sentence was done, pulling the half-sleeping child across without breaking pace. And Caleb rode hard toward the fire, with the cold, specific knowledge of what this was. Not an accident. A message.
The south field was fully involved by the time he reached it, and Holt and Briggs were already there with buckets, fighting the edges, and it was already clear that the feed stack was gone. Nothing saving that now. But the fence line could hold if they worked it fast enough, and the wind was with them tonight, which was the one mercy. He worked the fire for 2 hours. Clara arrived 20 minutes after he did. Emma settled in the house with Briggs's wife, who had come across from the neighboring cabin when she saw the light. And she worked beside Caleb without being asked, hauling water, reading the wind, doing exactly what needed doing without instruction. When it was finally out, when the last of it was down to smoking ground and cold bucket, Caleb stood in the field and looked at what remained. A season's worth of feed. Gone. Holt came up beside him. "Creel," he said quietly. "I think I saw his horse. Can't be certain. Dark and fast." "I know," Caleb said. "This was a warning," Holt said. "I know," Caleb said again. He turned around. Clara was standing 10 feet behind him, her face streaked with ash and exhaustion, her hair down around her shoulders from the work of the night. She was looking at him with that direct, steady look he had come to understand was the realest thing about her. The look that didn't manage or compose or calculate, just saw and responded to what was actually there. "He's not going to stop," she said. "No." Caleb looked at the burned field, then back at her. "He's not." "Then we don't give him time to do the next thing," she said. "We move first. Tomorrow." She paused. "I know who to call. I know who in this territory has the authority to move on Pullman's arrangement if they have the right evidence in front of them. My father's name opens that door." She held his gaze. "But I need you to trust me. Fully. Whatever I ask you to do tomorrow, I need you to do it without waiting to understand why." Caleb looked at his wife in the dark field, in the ash, in the smoke, in the aftermath of everything Silas Boone had done and was promising to do next. He thought about the train platform, the city shoes, the face-down book. 3 letters and an arrangement built on almost nothing. He thought about a fence repaired in July heat and a horse remounted after a fall, and the little girl's scraped knee held with careful hands, and the county clerk's stamp landing on paper, and 2 neighbors choosing differently because a woman explained the truth to them clearly and without apology. He thought about what trust actually was, between 2 people who had chosen each other in the dark, with incomplete information, on nothing but instinct and faith, and the belief that the other person was worth the risk. "Tell me what to do," he said. And Clara Whitmore Turner, daughter of a Union colonel, former schoolteacher, mail-order bride, the woman he hadn't ordered and hadn't expected, and was only now beginning to understand he had been waiting for without knowing it, took a breath and began to plan. Clara's plan was not complicated. That was the first thing Caleb noticed about it. She didn't overcomplicate it the way frightened people overcomplicated things, adding layers to feel safer, building scaffolding over a simple structure until you couldn't see the structure anymore. She laid it out clean and direct, sitting at the kitchen table at midnight with ash still on her face, and her father's documents spread between them, and he listened, without interrupting, because he had told her he would trust her, and he was a man who kept his word. The plan had 3 parts. First, a letter, written tonight, in her hand, over her signature and her father's name,
to United States Marshal Thomas Greer of the Denver Federal Office.
Her father had corresponded with Greer for 6 years. The name Whitmore would get the letter read within the hour of its arrival. The contents: survey fraud, advance information sold for private profit, federal land acquisition law violated across multiple properties, would get a response within the day. Second, copies of the original survey documents to Hensley and McGregor both, delivered by Holt at first light, giving them the physical evidence they needed to back their own legal challenges. Third, and this was the part that made Caleb go still, a direct meeting with Silas Boone. "No," he said. "Yes," she said. "Clara, he doesn't know the marshal's letter exists yet," she said. "He thinks he's still ahead of us, that he burned the field and we're scared, and this is the part where we make a desperate move he can predict." She looked at him steadily. "I want to be in front of him before he finds out we've already won. I want to see his face when he understands what's happened. Because a man like Boone, when he realizes he's cornered, he'll do one of two things. He'll go quiet and legal, or he'll go loud and stupid. And I need to know which one he is before Marshal Greer arrives." "Why?" "Because if he goes quiet, we're done, and this is over. But if he goes loud, if he does something in front of witnesses, something the marshal can add to the federal case, then it's not just survey fraud. It's intimidation, destruction of property, possibly worse." She paused. "I want to know which man he is, Caleb, because the legal protection I can build around this ranch depends on which way he breaks." Caleb sat with this for a long moment. "You're using yourself as bait," he said. "I'm using information as bait," she said. "There's a difference." "Not from where I'm sitting." She met his eyes. "I'll have you beside me, and I'll know everything he doesn't know. That's not bait. That's leverage." He looked at her for a long time. The lamp burned between them. The house was quiet around them. Emma sleeping down the hall, the smell of smoke still in the walls from the night's work. "Write the letter," he said. "We send it with the first rider at sunup. Then we'll talk about Boone." She accepted this, understanding, as she had learned to understand, that with Caleb Turner a partial agreement was not a loss, but a process. She pulled paper toward her and began to write, and he sat across from her and watched her hand move across the page, and thought about trust and what it cost, and whether it was worth it, and arrived, not for the first time, at the same answer he'd been arriving at more and more frequently. Yes. Unambiguously. Yes. Holt rode out before sunrise. The letter to Marshal Greer went with Briggs on the early stage to Denver, pressed into his hand with specific instructions, and the kind of look from Caleb that communicated the precise weight of what was being asked. Briggs had worked this ranch for 11 years. He didn't need the look explained. By 7 in the morning, the pieces were in motion. By 8, Caleb had saddled 2 horses. "You decided?" Clara said, coming out of the house to find him in the yard. "I thought about it," he said. "You're right that we need to know which way he breaks. And I think—" He paused, and she could see him working through it, being honest with himself in real time, the way he was honest about most things. "I think you understand men like Boone better than I do, because you've seen them before, and I haven't." She looked at him. "Your father's work," he said. "You grew up watching men who operated the way Boone operates. I've only ever known men who worked the land and kept their word. I know how to fight what I know." He handed her the reins. "I don't always know how to fight what I don't." She took the reins and said, "You know more than you think." "Maybe," he said, "but today I'm following your lead." She swung up into the saddle with the ease that had come back to her over these weeks. No hesitation, no caution, just the clean movement of someone back in their own body. And he mounted beside her, and they rode toward Boone's property in the early morning light, without looking back. Silas Boone's ranch was larger than Caleb's. That was the first thing you understood about it. The scale of it was designed to communicate something. The way certain men built their houses taller than necessary, or spoke louder than the room required. Boone met them in the yard himself, which told Caleb that he'd been watching the road. He was a man in his 50s, broad through the chest, and carrying his age the way powerful men sometimes did. Not heavily, but deliberately. Like a thing he decided to wear rather than something happening to him. He had the kind of face that could be pleasant when he wanted it to be. And he wanted it to be now. "Mr. Turner," he extended his hand. "And Mrs. Turner. I heard you'd married. Congratulations." "Mr. Boone." Caleb shook the hand because refusing would have given something away. "We were hoping for a conversation." "Of course," Boone smiled. "I've been hoping for the same thing. Come inside." "We'll talk here," Clara said. Something moved across Boone's face. Fast, almost nothing, but she caught it because she was watching for it. The slight recalibration of a man who expected to control the space and has been politely denied it. "As you like," he said. Clara opened the saddlebag and drew out a single document. Not the originals, which were safely in the county record now, but a clean copy she had made the previous night in precise, unhurried handwriting. She held it out to Boone. He took it, read it. His face did not change, but his breathing did. Just slightly, just enough. "The county contestation," he said. "Filed yesterday," she said. "In person. Stamped and entered into public record. No acquisition proceedings can move forward in the Creek corridor until the review is complete." She paused. "Which will take, at minimum, 4 months, possibly 6. Boone folded the paper. His hands were steady. "This is a legal matter. My attorneys will be very interested," Clara said, "in the original survey documents my father compiled in 1869, which I have, and which show that the railroad route you've been describing to landowners in this valley is not the primary route in those documents." She held his gaze without blinking. "You've been selling a threat that was, at best, a significant exaggeration, and the people who signed based on that threat now have grounds to challenge those sales." The yard was very still. "My father's name carries weight in the federal land office," she continued, and her voice was the same voice she used when she talked Emma through arithmetic. Patient, clear, completely without fear. "The documentation is thorough, and I have been in correspondence with parties who have the authority and the motivation to examine everything you've done in this valley over the past 2 years very carefully." She paused. "I'm telling you this directly and in person because I believe you're a man who prefers to know where he stands. And right now, you're standing somewhere you don't want to be." Boone looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb. Caleb said nothing. He held Boone's gaze with the flat, complete stillness of a man who has done his accounting and is at peace with the results. "This is your doing," Boone said to him. "Not angry. Measuring." "She's my wife," Caleb said. "Her doing is my doing. That's how it works." Something shifted in Boone's expression. Clara felt it before she saw it. The change in the air, the almost imperceptible forward lean of a man deciding to move rather than wait. And her stomach tightened. "You think a piece of paper and a dead colonel's notes are going to stop anything," Boone said, and his voice had dropped. The pleasant surface gone now, something harder underneath. "You think because you rode to some county clerk and stamped a form, you're protected." He looked at Clara specifically. "Your father's name opened doors once. This is a different territory now. Different men." "You're right,"
Clara said, and he blinked, not expecting agreement. The legal process is slow. It's uncertain.
It can be delayed and complicated by the right attorney. She reached into the saddlebag again and produced a second document, a copy of the letter to Marshal Greer, with the delivery confirmation note Briggs had signed before he left. Which is why I also contacted the federal marshal's office in Denver this morning, directly, with full documentation of your arrangement with Garrett Pullman. She held the paper out. That process is neither slow nor uncertain. Boone did not take the paper. She watched him read it from where he stood. She watched his jaw tighten, then release, then tighten again. She watched the calculation happening behind his eyes, the rapid, desperate accounting of a man discovering that the ground he thought was solid has a seam running through it. Pullman is a private citizen, he started, who used advance access to federal survey information for private financial gain, Clara said, across multiple land purchases, in coordination with you. She paused. My father spent 30 years working in federal land administration. I know exactly what that is, and I know exactly what it carries. So does Marshal Greer. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Caleb had heard in years. He watched Boone stand in it. Watched the man process, recalculate, look for the exit, and not find one. And he saw the moment, the exact moment, when Boone made his decision. His shoulders came down, almost imperceptibly. Not defeat, not yet, but the particular posture of a man choosing the quieter path over the louder one, and not because he wanted to. What do you want? Boone said, flat, stripped of the pleasantness now. I want what I've always wanted, Caleb said. My land, my water rights, my neighbors left alone. He paused. And I want your men off my fence line, permanently. Boone looked at him for a long moment. And if I agree to that, then the federal correspondence reflects a land dispute that was resolved without escalation, Clara said. I can't speak for Hensley and McGregor. That's their matter and their choice. But the Whitmore documents go back into the satchel, and the Whitmore name stops appearing in letters to Denver. She paused. I have no interest in destroying you, Mr. Boone. I have an interest in protecting my family. Those are different things. Boone looked at her. The calculation was still happening. She could feel it. You're Colonel Whitmore's daughter, he said. Not a question. More like a man reassessing an error he'd made early and was only now fully understanding the cost of. Yes, she said. He looked at Caleb. Where did you find her? She found me, Caleb said. And something in his voice when he said it, something low and certain and without any performance to it at all, made Clara look at him, just briefly, just for a second. Boone handed the copy back to her. He said nothing for a moment, and the silence was different from the previous one. Not loaded, but tired. The silence of a man who has run a long race and reached the end of it in a place he didn't intend. I'll have my attorney contact the county office, he said, about the corridor purchases. He paused. It may take time. We have time, Clara said. Now. He nodded once, the way men nodded when a negotiation was over, and everyone had understood the terms, and no one was happy, but everyone could live with it. Then he turned and went inside without another word, and the door closed behind him, and the yard was empty. Caleb and Clara sat on their horses in the quiet for a moment. He'll honor it, she said quietly. Not because he wants to, because the alternative is worse, and he knows it. I know, Caleb said. Are you all right? He looked at her. I'm fine. Are you? Yes. She let out a breath that was longer and slower than the ones that had preceded it, the breath of someone who had been holding a great deal for a long time and was finally setting some of it down. "Yes, I am." They rode home. Emma met them at the gate, which she had been told repeatedly not to do and kept doing anyway, bouncing in the particular way that communicated both relief and the pretense of not having been worried. She looked at their faces and read them with the speed she read everything, and the tension went out of her small shoulders. "Did you win?" she said. Caleb got down from his horse. He reached out and tucked Emma against his side with one arm, and she let herself be tucked the way she only did when she'd been frightened, and was allowing herself to be done being frightened now. "We didn't lose," he said. "That's not the same." "No," he agreed, "but it's enough for today." Emma considered this. Then she looked at Clara, who had dismounted and was standing close, and she reached out and took Clara's hand with the direct, uncomplicated certainty of someone who had decided a long time ago that this was where that hand belonged. "I prayed again last night," Emma said, "when the fire started. I told God that if He kept you both safe, I wouldn't climb the fence for a whole month." Clara squeezed her hand. "That's a serious negotiation." "I'm a serious person," Emma said. Caleb made a sound that was, unmistakably, a laugh. Short and low, surprised out of him. The laugh of a man who didn't laugh enough and knew it. Emma looked up at him with wide eyes, like she'd witnessed a rare and wondrous natural phenomenon. And Clara looked at him too, and he looked back at her and didn't look away. He held her gaze for a beat that stretched. "Come inside," he said. "Both of you." The weeks that followed moved differently from the weeks before. Not easier exactly, and not without trouble. Boone's attorney did contact the county, and the process was slow and contentious the way legal processes always were. And there were 2 more letters from Denver, and 1 visit from a federal associate of Marshall Greer's that required an entire day of documentation and testimony, and left Clara exhausted in a way that was different from physical tiredness. Holt found evidence in Decker's vacated bunk that confirmed what they'd suspected. A folded note in Boone's hand. Instructions. A sum of money. Caleb fired him in absentia and didn't speak about it more than once. But she saw what it cost him, because she had learned to see what things cost him. Hensley challenged his sale. McGregor did too, with more noise and more anger. And the county was occupied with a creek corridor dispute through the end of summer and into fall. 2 months after Clara had stood in Boone's yard and laid the truth in front of him, Pullman was under federal investigation, and Boone had retreated into the particular quiet of a man whose plans have been dismantled and who is deciding whether to rebuild or simply survive. He was surviving. That was enough. The ranch recovered. The Southfield's loss was real, and the winter would be leaner for it. But Caleb had planned for lean winters before, and he planned for this one too. And Briggs and Holt worked the fall with the extra effort of men who understand they're working for something worth working for. Clara learned the horses, not just tolerating them, learning them, the way she learned everything, from the beginning and without shortcuts. The gray mare that had thrown her in the first week became the horse she rode every morning, and she rode well enough by September that Holt told Caleb, with the approval of a man not given to easy approval, that she had a natural seat and good hands. Caleb relayed this to her. She received it with a slight smile she used for things that mattered to her more than she wanted to show. She stopped hiding the books. He noticed the day it changed, a Tuesday in August, the tactical survey volume sitting openly on the kitchen table when he came in for lunch, alongside 2 others he hadn't seen before, something on military logistics and one on territorial water law. He didn't comment on it. He sat down, ate his lunch, and afterward picked up the water law volume and read the first chapter before setting it back down. "Useful?" she asked. "Parts of it," he said. That was all. But something in the house settled after that. Something quiet and permanent, like a window that had been painted shut being opened for the first time. Emma's birthday was in September. She turned 9 with a ceremony appropriate to the occasion. Holt and Briggs both came to the table. Clara baked the apple cake she'd been perfecting since July. And Emma received a new pair of boots and a book about horses and a carved wooden box from Caleb that had belonged to her mother, given now because Emma was old enough to understand what it meant and careful enough to be trusted with it. Emma held the box for a long time without speaking, which was unlike her. Then she looked up at her father and said, "Mama would have liked her, wouldn't she?" Not a question. The statement of a child who has thought about something for a long time and arrived at certainty. Caleb's throat moved. He looked at Clara across the table, and Clara held very still because she understood that this was not a moment that belonged to her, and she was not going to make it one. "Yes," Caleb said. "She would have." Emma nodded, satisfied, and set the box down carefully in front of her, and that was the end of it, and also the beginning of something else. That night, after Emma was asleep, Caleb found Clara on the porch. She was sitting on the bench with her knees drawn up and her arms around them, looking out at the dark field, at the dark where the fire had been, which was already greening at the edges with the particular stubbornness of land that has been burned and is coming back. He sat down beside her, not across from her, the way they'd sat at the kitchen table through all the hard conversations of the summer, beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She didn't move away. "Emma was right," he said. "Sarah would have liked you." Clara was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad. I want you to know that." He paused, and she could feel him choosing words with a careful deliberateness he brought to things he considered important. "I placed an advertisement for a woman who could handle hard work. That was all I thought I needed. Someone to make the practical parts of this life function." Another pause. "I didn't know. I didn't understand that what I actually needed was someone to—" He stopped. She waited. "Someone to make it worth functioning for," he said. "That's what I didn't know I was asking for." The night was warm and still, and the stars were brilliant overhead, and somewhere in the dark the horses moved in the pen, slow and easy, and the land was quiet. Clara unfolded her arms and let her shoulder rest fully against his. He didn't move away. "I came here with 1 bag and 3 letters and a collection of my father's documents," she said. "I came because I had nothing left, and the frontier seemed like the kind of place where you could build something from nothing if you were willing to work." She paused. "I didn't expect Emma. I didn't expect Holt and Briggs and a gray mare who throws me and a fence line that needed repairing." She paused again. "I didn't expect you." He turned his head slightly toward her. "I'm glad I didn't expect you," she said quietly, "because I would have talked myself out of it." He let out a breath, slow and long, the breath of a man setting something down that he'd carried for 3 years without putting down. His hand moved from his knee to hers, unhurried and deliberate, and he held it there. And she turned her hand over, and he took it, and they sat together in the warm September dark, and did not need to say anything else. Inside the house, Emma slept with her mother's wooden box on the table beside her bed, already planning, in some dreaming part of her mind, where she would put the things she loved most inside it. Outside, the land stretched dark and wide and alive in all directions, and the ranch that had been silent for 3 years had found its voice again, in the sound of boots on floorboards, and water on a stove, and a little girl's laughter, and 2 people learning each other in real time, with patience and honesty, and the particular courage of those who have been broken before, and choose, despite everything, to try again.
Caleb Turner had ordered a capable woman. He had received, instead, exactly what he needed: a partner, a protector, a person who fought for his family with the same ferocity she brought to everything she loved, which turned out, quietly and without announcement, to include him.
And Emma Ruth Turner, who had been praying since February, climbed the fence the very next morning, because she had said a whole month, and it had only been 3 weeks, and she was a serious person, not a saint, and looked out at the golden fields and the wide sky and the 2 adults coming out of the house together. And she cupped her hands around her mouth and hollered, "I can see you both!" and felt, all the way down to her boot soles, that the answer she'd been waiting for had finally, completely, irrevocably arrived. Some prayers take a long time, but the ones worth praying always find their way home.